Okay, so here's your video that I promised. No, this car has never been rebuilt. It's never been rear-ended. Actually, that's a total lie. My wife backed it into a small pole, but it didn't do any real damage other than just some scratches. So what I'm gonna show you is just what I would look at in the event that I was looking at a rebuilt title. Ignore the kid riding down the street on a dirt bike. Rebuilt title for rear end damage, okay? As we discussed on the phone, the depending on what state it was totaled in, depending on their standards, it could vary greatly on how much damage it actually takes to total the car out and what it takes to rebuild it. First things first, what I would do, open up the rear door, all right? Open up the rear door and look at this surface right here, okay? Now, this car has had some PDR, paintless dent removal work done, as evident by these little plugs. They'll drill a hole in here, they'll go in here with tools, they'll work out little door dings and stuff like that, and then they'll put these little plugs in. Same thing down here. They'll go in here, they'll work out little dents down here, and they'll stick those plugs in. So that's a telltale sign that it had some work done in that area. Second thing to look at would be this door latch striker. Make sure that the color matches on both sides. Sometimes they're black, sometimes they're gold, just depends on the supplier. Aftermarket ones tend to be an unpainted gold surface. Make sure that they're the same on both sides. And then that goes for the same thing with the front doors. Make sure that it's the same color on the front doors that it is on the back doors. Otherwise, that'll tell you that these have been potentially replaced. All right. The next thing, look at this arch right here that goes over the rear tire. Not so much this line, because they'll get that straight, because when you close the door, they want this body gap to be as smooth as possible, right? So what you want to look at is this line and this line. You may have more, you may have less, but on this car there's two. You want them to be as closely matched as possible and look the same on both sides. All right, make sure that this right here is nice and smooth. There's nothing, you know, little stuff like this, no big deal. That's just a spot, well, I'm sorry, no, that's where a seatbelt was closed in the door. But just make sure there's no wrinkles in here, all right? You can even look at the inside of the door to see whether or not the door has been painted. If you would look along this edge right here, a body shop will apply tape here to tape off everything inside here so that none of the overspray paint goes into the car. So you'll have a tape line somewhere in here that you'll be able to feel with your hand. Obviously not the metal skin of the door, but somewhere, some other just small little line where tape has been run and then the car has been painted and then the tape has been removed. All right. The next thing to look at would be the gas door. And obviously you're only going to have this on one side, but this is just something to check too. On this car, it's kind of hard to see. I'm not sure what the Buick setup is, but underneath, behind all here, if this is all metal, you want to see that this is nice and smooth. There's no wrinkles in it or anything like that. All right. If there's wrinkles back here, that means at some point this panel was in a rear end collision. This panel could potentially get worked down, right? And then they'll hook it to a machine with chains and they'll pull out this portion of the frame and the bumper supports, which pull that way, which means that this whole panel will then just go like that. This little area right here is very hard to get back straight because it's so many angles and so much little metal pieces that it's very hard to get straight. So check in the gas door. Look at your tail light gaps. Make sure that this is nice and straight, nice and even, right? You don't want to see it tight up here and then super close down here. Bumper supports and things like that, make sure that your bumper gaps are correct. By correct, I just mean straight and uniform, relatively uniform on both sides, right? So this car has been backed into a little tiny pole at our neighbor's house. You can see that there. So this side of the bumper got a little bit pushed out. Am I worried about it? Nope. The other things, look at your trunk lifts. You want to see if these have been taken off. right? If these have paint, have tool marks on them, it looks like somebody's had a ratchet on them, because it will break off some of that paint. That means that this trunk has been taken off, and it's not quite as minor as just a bumper cover replacement, right? Next thing to look at would be in here, this edge right here, all through here. Make sure there's no wrinkles on either side. It's still nice and smooth. You don't have any tool marks on your hinges, and it doesn't look, you'll be able to tell, unless they repaint the hinges too, whether they've been taken off and repositioned, because that paint that's right here, you'll be able to see when this car was painted. If I pulled this off and then put it back in, it's never going to line back up perfectly. So you'll be able to see an unpainted section of that surface behind here, right? All right, and the biggest, absolute biggest thing that I can tell you to look at, aside from climbing underneath, which I'll show you in a second, the biggest thing, come in the trunk, pull up your carpet, right? And you want to look at your floor pan. You don't want to see, you want to see body seam sealer, or sealer, sorry. You want to see seam sealer. You want to see it look relatively similar on both sides, right? You don't want to see, you'll be able to tell if they've replaced this floor plan or pan and straightened it back out, because the seam sealer will break and they'll have to scrape it off and redo it. If it looks different side to side, that means that this floor has been pulled back straight and they've resealed it. And the biggest thing to check inside the trunk, which I'm gonna probably struggle with here for just a quick second, would be take your carpeting right inside the trunk, pull it back. Pull it back, look down in here, use a flashlight on your phone or whatever you have to, look for any wrinkles, right? The same thing under here. You don't want to see anything wrinkled, okay? Same thing with the spare tire. If you can see underneath the spare tire, look underneath the spare tire for any wrinkles, and then check the other side as well. Make sure, if the car has been rear-ended, that you still have a jack and a lug nut tool and all that stuff. And then do the same thing on the other side. You pull this back, you look underneath here to make sure you don't see anything wrinkly with the floor, nothing wrinkly with the inner structure, because out here, that's just a skin, right? They can pull that straight. But this underneath here is the inner structure. This is a whole separate piece that they have to worry about straightening out, okay? And the last thing is underneath here, okay? If it's just a bumper cover, right, you would not expect this, here is the crash bar, okay? This is the crash bar, here's where it bolts to the car. If it was just a bumper cover, these things should look like they're about the same age, right? This should not be super wavy. Look underneath here, right? Because this is where your spare tire sits. Look underneath here at these seams to see if they're broken or jacked up or anything like that, all right? That's a very good indicator on how severe this damage was, because if it was just a cover and this crash bar looks the same as everything else, there's no damage to this lip right here for the spare tire to sit in, that means it probably really was just a bumper cover. This is a separate piece altogether. This is just a plastic cover that goes over the metal crash bar. If that looks new, chances are that was replaced too, this is right behind the bumper cover, but before this crash bar. Look at your exhaust hangers, right? So like on this car, it's right here. Look at your hangers to see if they look like they have been pulled straight. What else? These are the bumper supports, right? So if these look like they are wrinkly, you obviously want a nice straight line. If they're wrinkly, but this still looks new, or I'm sorry, not looks new, but looks the same age as the car, no big deal, right? Because that's just a crash support, or I'm sorry, bumper support. And then come over to the edges of the car and then look at, well, it's kind of hard to see because of the darkness. This is the inner structure of that fender, right? So here's my bumper cover. This is just plastic. This is the metal that's on the inside of that bumper on the side of the car, right? Because this is the side of the car. Look at this. Make sure they're straight. Just do your due diligence on both sides, right? Because that's still pretty straight. This car has never been rear-ended. You don't want to see any wrinkles. If you see wrinkles in any of this stuff, right? This is your they don't have frames or unibody, but this is your frame rail. It's going to look relatively similar on all cars. If that's wrinkly, walk away. These right here, these three pieces, these three little indentations, those are deformation lines. These are intended to bend in the event of a collision, okay? That's why cars get totaled out pretty easily, because once these bend and you pull them back, they're never quite as strong, or they're never as strong as they were. So if those are jacked up, walk away, because that means if the car gets rear-ended again in the time that you own it, it's going to, your initial collision may have only taken it in this far, right? At 20 miles an hour or whatever it may have been. That same collision next time, if you get rear-ended at 20 miles an hour again, it'll take it in this far. You know what I mean? So if those are deformed, again, it's on, well, it's kind of hard to see because my exhaust is in the way. You can kind of see one of them right there. Right, where's my finger? There we go. Right there, between the hanger and the muffler. Yep. If those are deformed and pushed in and wrinkly, walk away. Again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask. I'll answer anything I can. I don't have a whole lot going on tomorrow, or Monday rather, so feel free to ask. I'll answer anything I can. Peace.